Rule 1. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Rule 2. It's silly to try to escape other people's faults. They are inescapable. Just try to escape your own. Rule 3. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Rule 4. If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment. Rule 5. You always own the option of having no opinion. There is never any need to get worked up or to trouble your soul about things you can't control. These things are not asking to be judged by you. Leave them alone. Rule 6. Begin each day by telling yourself, today I shall be meeting with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness, all of them due to the offender's ignorance of what is good or evil. But for my part, I have long perceived the nature of good and its nobility, the nature of evil and its meanness, and also the nature of the culprit himself, who is my brother, not in the physical sense, but as a fellow creature similarly endowed with reason and a share of the divine. Therefore, none of those things can injure me, for nobody can implicate me in what is degrading. Neither can I be angry with my brother or fall foul of him, for he and I were born to work together, like a man's 2 hands, feet, or eyelids, or the upper and lower rows of his teeth. To obstruct each other is against nature's law, and what is irritation or aversion but a form of obstruction? Rule 7. Time is like a river made up of the events which happen, and a violent stream. For as soon as a thing has been seen, it is carried away, and another comes in its place, and this will be carried away. Rule 8. At dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, I have to go to work, as a human being. What do I have to complain of if I'm going to do what I was born for, the things I was brought into the world to do? Or is this what I was created for? To huddle under the blankets and stay warm? So you were born to feel nice, instead of doing things and experiencing them? Don't you see the plants, the birds, the ants and spiders and bees, going about their individual tasks, putting the world in order as best they can? And you're not willing to do your job as a human being? Why aren't you running to do what your nature demands? You don't love yourself enough. Or you'd love your nature too, and what it demands of you. Rule 9. When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. Rule 10. If any man despises me, that is his problem. My only concern is not doing or saying anything deserving of contempt. Stepping back from emotional and physical chaos to reach a state of calm, clear-headed thinking is the bedrock of Stoicism, a philosophy famously practiced by Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. Although Stoicism was conceived in ancient times, its guiding principles are very relevant today. According to cognitive behavioral psychotherapist Donald Robertson, his new book, How to Think Like a Roman Emperor, The Stoic Philosophy of Marcus Aurelius, examines how Stoicism informed the leader's personal and political life. It also shows how the philosophy can help with the challenges of modern life, including work. Robertson, a practicing Stoic, visited the Knowledge at Wharton radio show on Sirius XM to share his story and discuss the power of Stoicism. Listen to the podcast at the top of this page. An edited transcript of the conversation follows. Knowledge at Wharton. How does Stoicism work in the business community? Donald Robertson. It's a strange thing. I didn't anticipate this, but one of the biggest groups of people interested in it seems to be millennials who work in the tech industry. I feel like it can take root in Silicon Valley. Where I live in Toronto, I meet a lot of young people working in software development or the tech industry in general, who are particularly drawn to this philosophy, Knowledge at Wharton. Tell us the story of Marcus Aurelius and how Stoicism became his philosophy for living and ruling in the Roman Empire. Robertson. Marcus Aurelius is one of the good Roman emperors. He lived in the 2nd century AD, and his reign was subject to many problems. It came after a peaceful period in history. As soon as he became emperor, there was a war with the Parthians, Then the Roman Empire was invaded again by barbarians from the north. There was a famine, the river Tiber flooded, and he had a plague called the Antonine Plague, which was thought to have killed as many as 5 million people. He had a really hard time of it and had to lean on this philosophy that he studied when he was a young man in order to cope with it. We're blessed to have his personal record of how he coped with adversity. The psychological techniques and strategies that he used derived from Stoic philosophy. Knowledge at Wharton. It is interesting that his book, Meditations, still holds importance to people who read it today. Robertson. Meditations must be one of the most popular self-help spiritual guides of all time. It's always been a popular book, and it's gone through a resurgence of popularity today. From my perspective as a cognitive therapist, that's because the cognitive revolution in psychotherapy in the 1950s drew heavily on Stoicism for inspiration as an alternative to Sigmund Freud and all that kind of stuff. The new model of psychotherapy was influenced by Stoicism, and that's filtered down through self-help and psychological literature in general. Knowledge at Wharton. Is Stoicism the reason why Marcus Aurelius was able to rule for the length of time that he did and have the impact that you alluded to? Robertson. One of the historians actually comments on that. He said that even though Marcus was a notoriously frail man and had a number of health problems, he still managed to outlive a bunch of other people around him in an incredibly tough time. People were dropping like flies because of the wars and the plagues. And Marcus nearly reached 50, which isn't exceptionally old, but that's fairly good for that particular period in Roman history. He was tougher than he looked, you could say. We think that was because of the psychological strategies that he developed to cope with his emotions and to cope with the physical pain and illness that he had to endure. Knowledge at Wharton. In the book, you talk about understanding that there are going to be times when things are beyond your control. I think that's an incredibly important idea to bring into personal and business life today because of all that we have going on. Robertson. Absolutely. Some people think it's even more timely now because we're so bombarded with information. We're constantly being told about the bigger picture in the world and things going on in other countries that we have very little control over. The Stoics realized a long time ago that the trick was learning to make a clear distinction in our mind between what's under our direct control and what isn't. Ultimately, the only thing that's really under our control is our own will, our own actions. Things happen to us, but what we can really control is the way that we respond to those things. Stoicism wants us to take also greater responsibility, greater ownership for the things that we can actually do, both in terms of our thoughts and our actions, and respond to the situations that we face. Knowledge at Wharton. If you're somebody who doesn't have a handle on that concept, life can feel incredibly stressful, right? Robertson. In my clinical practice, I've worked with many people who suffered, for example, from generalized anxiety disorder or GAD. Most of the things people worry about tend to be outside their direct control, the distant future or events in politics and stuff like that. Often when they're doing that, they neglect to do the things that they could be doing that are under their control. Knowledge at Wharton, you're telling the story of Marcus Aurelius and correlating it with today's world. For example, you talk about how to speak wisely. Do you think there is a significant issue surrounding speech and how it is used now? Robertson. It's one of the things that people often overlook about Stoicism and what it can teach us. People use flowery, emotive language a lot of the time, and they curse and swear when they're faced with problems. If someone is anxious in a meeting, they'll say, "That guy shot me down in flames." They could just say, "Oh, he expressed disagreement with me." This is very obvious when you're working with clients in therapy, but when you describe the same situation in more value-free, more objective, matter-of-fact terms, it often seems much less distressing. We unconsciously, unintentionally make ourselves even more worked up about things when we use rhetoric on ourselves in this way. And the Stoics were very aware of this problem. If we do, I've worked with so many people over the past 20 years or so who are into Stoicism. There's a growing community around it now, and I hear over and over again the same thing. People will say, Well, it's like academic philosophy, but it's more practical. They'll say it's like Buddhism, but it's a Western alternative to it. They'll say it's like Christianity, but more secular and more rational and philosophical. It seems to fill a gap in our culture at the moment, providing a philosophical, down-to-earth and rational way of life that can help people find meaning, but also to become more emotionally resilient.